Welcome to Timeless Photos. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss more videos like this one.
Once a slave pen, now a museum on enslavement and freedom. Starting in 1828, two slave traders named Isaac Franklin and John Armfield used this building as a holding pen for thousands of enslaved black people. Enslaved individuals were brought here from plantations where they had picked up tobacco. They were kept at this jail until they were shipped south to Natchez and New Orleans, where they were sold at even higher prices to work cotton and sugarcane fields. By 1836, it had become one of the largest slave trading operations in the United States. The scourged back of Gordon. Peter, also known as Gordon or Whipped Peter, was an escaped slave whose photographs documented the extensive scarring on his back from whippings. This scourged back photo became one of the most widely circulated images of the abolitionist movement during the Civil War. Peter escaped at midnight on March 24, 1863, from Captain John Lyon's 3,000-acre plantation in Louisiana. Forced labor in Liberia circa 1930. In 1929 to 1930, Liberia faced accusations of forcing tribal people to work on plantations on the Spanish island of Fernando Po. After an American missionary reported these abuses, the League of Nations launched an investigation. The commission found that while traditional slavery wasn't practiced, there was a system of forced labor, particularly connected to Firestone rubber plantations. By the late 1970s, international pressure finally compelled Firestone and Liberia to abandon their forced labor system. Slaves at a coffee yard in a farm, Vale do Paraíba, Sao Paulo. This photograph shows enslaved men and women arranged in a grid while carrying baskets and raking coffee beans. The overseer, wearing a black jacket, directs their work from the corner of the image. Around 4 million Africans were forcibly brought to Brazil from the 16th century onward, making it the largest slave trade in the Americas. In the 1880s, when this photo was taken, the Paraíba Valley had Brazil's highest concentration of enslaved people, despite growing abolitionist movements. Slavery in Zanzibar. This image from the Anti-Slavery Reporter, 1896, shows enslaved people in chains guarded by an askari, soldier, in Zanzibar. During this period, Zanzibar was a major hub for the East African slave trade, serving as a key port for transporting enslaved people. The late 19th century saw increasing British-led efforts to abolish slavery in the region, but these chains show the brutal reality many people still faced. Lucy Cottrell. Lucy Cottrell was the daughter of Dorothea Dolly Cottrell, a house servant at Thomas Jefferson's Monticello. In 1827, both became the property of George Bletterman, a professor at the University of Virginia, through an exchange for members of the Hughes family. Around 1850, they were taken to Maysville, Kentucky by the professor's widow, who finally freed them 5 years later. In this picture, Lucy is shown holding Charlotte, the daughter of Bletterman's foster son. Isaac Granger Jefferson. Isaac Granger Jefferson, 1775 to 1846, was born to enslaved parents at Monticello. His father was a foreman and overseer, while his mother worked as a pastry cook and laundress. Isaac worked as a nail maker, tinsmith, and blacksmith on Jefferson's estate. He gained his freedom in the 1820s and continued working as a blacksmith into his 70s. His first-hand recollections of life at Monticello were recorded and preserved, providing valuable historical insights. The children of slaves at Uncle Gabriel's cabin. This photo from 1860 to 1900 shows children of formerly enslaved people at Uncle Gabriel's cabin in South Carolina. After emancipation, many freed slaves and their families had nowhere to go and continued living on their former masters' properties. This reality highlights how freedom didn't automatically bring economic independence or opportunity for many formerly enslaved people and their descendants in the post-Civil War South. Sharecropper and his wife in July Heat, Mississippi, 1937. This image by Dorothea Lange captures an African-American sharecropper and his wife enduring the harsh summer heat in Mississippi. Taken during the Great Depression, it shows the difficult conditions faced by sharecroppers, who worked land owned by others in often exploitative arrangements. Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman was an American abolitionist famous for her work with the Underground Railroad. During the Civil War, she served in the Union Army as a nurse, cook, scout, and spy. In 1863, she led the Combahee River Raid, becoming the first woman to lead a military action during the war. This photo shows Tubman, far left, with people she helped rescue, taken when she was about 65 to 67 years old, still working to free enslaved people. Aunt Betty. Aunt Betty was enslaved by Mr. Walker at Faunsdale and worked as a cook for Reverend Harrison at St. Michael's. This 1915 photograph, taken in her home, shows a typical cabin interior of the time. Slaves returning from cotton fields in South Carolina. By 1850, the South was exporting over 1 million tons of cotton annually to English textile mills. Cotton's growing importance to the Southern economy intensified the demand for slave labor. By the Civil War's start, over 3 million enslaved people worked Southern soil, fueling the region's agricultural economy. This picture from the 1860s shows enslaved people returning at sunset from picking cotton on Alexander Knox's plantation near Charleston. Enslaved children freed by the 6th USCI. Some of these children had been forced to work in fields alongside their mothers when they were just toddlers. These photographs document enslaved children liberated by the 6th United States Colored Infantry, USCI. The 6th USCI fought in critical campaigns, including the Richmond-Petersburg Campaign and the Carolinas Campaign, which helped advance Union control and ultimately led to the freedom of many enslaved people. Slave quarters on St. George's Island. The Kingsley Plantation on Fort George Island in Jacksonville, Florida, contains the ruins of 25 tabby slave houses built around 1822 to 1830. These structures were home to enslaved people until the end of the Civil War. Afterward, many freed people continued to live in these same quarters. The preserved ruins stand as a physical reminder of the housing conditions imposed on enslaved people during the antebellum period. Deerfield family who worked for Frank Chesebro. In 1912, this Deerfield family began working for Frank Howard Chesebro, a prominent fruit grower and nurseryman who arrived in Boca Raton in 1903. As a major employer in the area, Chesebro cultivated crops like pineapples and tomatoes. This photo reflects early labor arrangements in Boca Raton, where families often worked together on farms and pooled resources to help build their communities. Johanna Leslie, ex-slave of Bracketville, Texas. Johanna Leslie, also known as Johanna July, was a black Seminole woman photographed in 1937 in Bracketville, Texas. Born around 1857 in Mexico, she belonged to a community established by former slaves and Seminoles. Slaves on James Joyner Smith's plantation. O'Sullivan, a renowned Civil War photographer, visited this region of South Carolina from November 1861 to March 1862. This photograph by Timothy O'Sullivan from 1862 shows what is believed to be the largest group of enslaved African Americans ever captured in a single image. The image provides rare documentation of the scale of enslavement on large Southern plantations during the Civil War period. Slaves washing clothes in the antebellum South. The antebellum South, spanning from the late 18th century to 1861, was characterized by slavery and a rural agricultural economy centered around plantations. Domestic tasks like laundry were part of the endless work expected of enslaved people, who provided the majority of labor throughout the South. This 1860s photograph shows enslaved people washing clothes by a stream during the antebellum period. African American soldier and family from the USCT. Founded in 1863, the USCT recruited African American soldiers for the Union Army during the Civil War. By the war's end, over 185,000 men had served, including more than 178,000 black soldiers. 6 Virginians earned the Medal of Honor, though black troops also faced racial atrocities. After the war, many veterans continued serving during Reconstruction or became community leaders. This image shows an African American soldier of the United States Colored Troops, USCT, with his family. Isaac and Rosa, emancipated slave children from New Orleans. Isaac White and Rosina Downs, aged 8 and 6, were emancipated slave children from New Orleans in 1863. Freed by the Union Army, they joined a group touring the North to raise awareness and funds for schools for former slaves. Rosa's light skin highlighted slavery's racial complexities. Photographer M.H. Kimball's portraits of these children were sold to support education for formerly enslaved people in Louisiana, representing hope for a better future.